Hey folks, Big Paul and Kurt Havens here. We're going to talk about building a mass cycle. And we're kicking off Kurt's YouTube channel with this. So I'm going to be a guest on Kurt's channel. This is awesome, man. Exciting that you're going to have a channel up and running.
Thank you for helping me do this.
So people like and subscribe. Give Kurt some support. So we want to talk about mass cycles, Kurt.
Cool. So you want to start with what, like for a beginner? Like
yeah, I mean, we can talk our way through a beginner. I would assume, well, I would assume that most people know that for beginners, I don't know how you structure your stuff for beginners, but generally I just start people off with testosterone.
Yeah, probably the same thing. So yeah, I mean, I would titrate test up right to a tolerable dose. And ideally you're not using an AI unless estrogen really becomes an issue. If depending on I mean, I don't think there's like a blanket statement that covers estrogen. I think it really depends on the person, right? Whether you need an AI or you just use much less. But yeah, I mean, in a person that responds pretty well, you titrate the test up to, you know, all the way, you know, the bigger guys are using 750 to 1500 test, and you generally would run an anabolic on top of that.
Yeah, and for brand new guys, usually for a first cycle, what I'll do, start them off, I guess it would be a high-end TRT plus, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, I usually start off at 250 since it's nice, simple, easy math. It's 1 cc of most testosterone's dosed at 250 per milliliter. So I usually just start off there at 250, and then I'll run them for like 6 weeks, and then I'll take it up to like 375 or something and see how they do. A lot of times halfway through the cycle, I'll have people run and get an estradiol test just to see how much, just to see how much estrogen they're converting. I would say that if you're fatter, a guy that's heavier, you're probably not going to be able to run testosterone that high. You're going to have a lot more estrogen conversion. And
you and I both have experienced that too, right? I mean, I know when I was younger, it was more of an issue at a lower dose. I can run more than a gram now without an AI.
Yeah, I mean, I can go up to a gram with an AI, but I'm also stacking it with a DHT derived injectable too, so that plays a factor in it as well.
No, I was going to say, so what Paul's saying is, so it really most DHTs will block estrogen to some extent, right? So the newest stuff that I'm working on is Masteron is basically acting as a SERM. In certain individuals, depending on genetics, it can act as an AI as well to an extent, but it's most likely a SERM. And Primobolan acts as an AI and a suicide AI at that. So those kind of manage estrogen too.
I have often wondered now if maybe the better way to start off a newbie cycle wouldn't be to do a lower dose testosterone with something like Masteron or Primobolan. I've given some thought to just going ahead and starting out with that for estrogen management instead of having to use an AI. I've thought, but it seems like testosterone, just to dip your toe in the pool, get used to doing injections, seeing how you respond is probably the way to go. But I have considered starting people off with testing a DHT derived PED.
It probably depends on the person too, right? Their age, how, you know, what their diet's like. I mean, the reason why I would always do tests is just because the body's going to handle it the best. It knows it. It's familiar. It knows how to metabolize it correctly.
It's predictable too. We know all the metabolic pathways of how it's going to aromatize to estrogen and how it's going to 5-alpha reduce to DHT. So we have somewhat of an idea of how your body's going to react to it.
Yeah. Versus like we just showed, like even Primobolan's been around since 1962 and we're still learning, right? They found 7 new metabolites of it. So we don't fully understand most of these drugs at all.
Yeah. Don't start off with Tren or D-bol, guys.
No. Yeah. And with that, it's, you know, and as guys get more advanced, it's not to say that there isn't a guy out there or a reason sometimes to add a little trend to something, right? I mean, if you've hit like an absolute plateau, there are guys who will leverage a little bit in a mass cycle. Same with guys who will leverage IGF and things like that. But I think for 99% of guys out there outside of a big Ramy, you probably don't need to leverage stuff like that. Like I've talked to guys that are very new at this stuff and they want to run, you know, growth and insulin and IGF and all these things and they're, you know, 200 pounds. It doesn't make any sense to me at that point to push that envelope.
Yeah, that's a good point too. I think everybody goes through these phases. I talk about it where they dip their toe in the pool and then they push up doses and then they want to try all these different exotic compounds trying to look for the secret. And then everybody ends up circling back around to the simple shit.
Yeah. And there's a reason why.
Yeah, because it works. Yeah, you don't feel like garbage. That's an important point too for the off season. So this is something I tell people about, and I think we can dig into this, running orals in the off season when you're trying to put on mass. But a lot of guys get obsessed with front loading cycles with orals, and you briefly touched on it about feeling like shit. That's the issue I've run into with orals. It's not necessarily that I have a problem with orals, but if you're trying to grow in the off season and your liver's stressed out, your stomach's upset, you end up with GERD, you're not going to be able to eat enough to grow. So that's why I've sort of steered away from orals in the off season. And you'll find that a lot of pro bodybuilders eventually get to that point where they stop using orals in the off season.
Yeah. Like Anadrol makes you feel like garbage, right? Yeah. Can't eat on it. At least I can't. Not something I find enjoyable at all.
No, I can get about 2 or 3 weeks into it, and then I start having just horrific acid reflux, and my appetite goes to absolute shit.
Yeah, and you're tired, right? Because you have organ stress at that point, and
yeah, your liver's all stressed out.
Yeah,
and if your liver's stressed out, you probably aren't metabolizing your food correctly.
No, that's kind of where everything starts.
Yeah. So my thought process. And I know there's this notion of running orals to front load a cycle, which I think is just absolutely stupid. And you can touch on that a little bit. But my thought process is if I were going to run an oral, I'm probably going to run it at the end of a blast if I need to just push a little bit more out of things. And I'm probably going to go with something like Anavar that's going to be lower toxicity.
Yeah. The old way to do it, right, was to like front load with D-ball or Anadrol. At least back in the day, it was always D-ball, and it was to kind of get gains, like the scale moving quickly. But the two problems I see is, first of all, the majority of that weight is water, glycogen, that's going to come on. So it's kind of a false sense of growth, and then you're double bombarding your body with estrogen for no reason. Like there's just no reason to stack methyl estradiol with regular estradiol from testosterone, just to push a scale up, when estrogen in and of itself is not necessarily going to cause growth. And like Paul just said, I would find the more advantageous way to run an oral in a cycle is kind of when you hit that plateau, right? There's always that weird place, like, some 6, 7, 8 weeks, maybe a little longer, where you're kind of, your gains just stop. And that would kind of be a place that you might want to leverage a couple more milligrams, and using something like Anavar at least is a safer way to do that if you're not going to use more injectables, right? For more advanced guys, sometimes then you just stack another, if you're running, test and primo, maybe at that point you add EQ or you add a little nandrolone or something. But, Anavar is relatively safe.
Yeah. And usually what I'll do towards the end of cycle, if I were going to run it, I will pick the body parts days that I'm struggling with, and I'll run it a couple hours pre-workout. So I'm limiting it to like 4 or 5 days a week. I'm not running it every day. And I found that that's enough to get me over the hump. And it doesn't put my liver values through the roof, and it doesn't make my stomach absolutely feel like shit.
And something interesting too about guys will talk about taking orals sublingual. So really, in order to bypass the liver and take something sublingual, what you have to do is take it right before you're exercising. It has to do with circulation. So if you were sitting on a couch and you took Anadrol and you put it under your tongue, circulation is mostly in the core of the body at that point. So it's still going to go to your liver. So you're not really bypassing anything. If you took Anavar or Anadrol an hour before you exercised, now this blood flow in your limbs, it'll actually stay away from the liver at that point. So that's actually the only way that ever makes any sense, when guys just are putting things under their tongue thinking that it's not going to hit the liver. That's not the way the body goes.
Yeah, assuming that it even gets absorbed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I've kind of come full circle on that. I used to be the sublingual guy. Now I just take the pill a couple hours.
Well, with Anavar, really, it's doing such minimal amount of stuff to your liver. It's more kidney metabolism anyway.
Yeah, kidneys. So a fundamental principle of the off season that I try to maintain and I preach to my clients is don't make yourself sick. It's really that simple. I'm not afraid to push doses up, and you'll hit this threshold with doses and with compounds that you're taking where you just start to feel like crap. You get lethargic. You're all run down. Your digestion sucks. If you can't eat, if you can't train hard, there's no point in pushing doses higher or taking toxic compounds.
No, 100%. And it's the whole point. I'm guessing your whole point of that is that food is going to be the best thing to leverage. So, and you like, this is something that I've known for years, but I never fully practiced, is how important the food really is, and that the gear is actually relatively minor. It doesn't need to be this amount that you can't sleep, you know, you don't feel great. It really doesn't take that much in the off season as long as you're eating appropriately. And if you don't feel good, I mean, the amount of food I eat now, there's no way I could do that if I felt sick or tired.
Yeah.
You know, you're not getting a good night's sleep. I mean, you're not going to grow if you're not sleeping either. I mean, we've all probably taken enough at one point that your sleep is seriously disrupted. That's got to destroy your growth.
Yeah, I'm there right now on contest prep.
Well, prep is, I mean, but you're not, hopefully you're not really growing right now. So
no, the goal right now, and that's a good point too. The goal with the off season and the goal with contest prep are two very different things.
Yeah, my recomping is generally not a thing.
Just throw that in the trash, guys. Unless you're a first-time user, sometimes I will see some people recomp. It's not to say it's impossible. My thought process on recomping is it's just a very inefficient way of bulking.
Yeah, it's like riding two horses with one ass. You're not really going to get very far.
So just pick a phase and optimize that phase. If you want to lose fat, lose fat. If you want to gain muscle, gain muscle. Do it in the most optimal way possible. Trying to chase both at the same time is likely going to end up with you spinning your wheels and not making much progress.
Yeah, and it doesn't need to be, I think, and then on the other extreme, it doesn't need to be this absurd amount of food either that you're getting fat, right? There's really no reason to like get absurdly overweight in the off season either.
Yeah, you know, I've learned that lesson the hard way.
25% body fat. That's just dumb.
The fatter you get in the off season, the harder your contest prep is going to be.
Yeah, and the fatter you are during your off season, the less insulin is going to work, right? You're not going to be able to push nutrients where they need to go, and then you're just going to get fatter and fatter and feel sicker and sicker, right? I mean, I think if everything is done with some level of sanity, right? Like a moderate dose that you're still growing on, a moderate amount of food that you're growing on, usually only takes a couple hundred calories over maintenance to grow a day, right? I mean, it's generally not this huge excess.
And this is why I think you'll find that most pro bodybuilders end up at the same place. You'll see them running testosterone as their primary compound. They'll pick an anabolic, a secondary anabolic. It's usually what I see is Primobolan or Equipoise, sometimes Masteron. There's a lot of people.
Yeah, nowadays Masteron made a comeback too.
Yeah, Masteron. Nobody ran Masteron 10 years ago.
It wasn't affordable either.
No.
Or attainable, right? It was tough to get.
I still prefer Primobolan or Equipoise for growth, off-season size. I think they're better for size. There's some people out there that would debate that, but it's my preference. Anecdotally, I've seen that. And then what you'll see is them throw in a sprinkle of NPP or DECA, Nandrolone, if you can tolerate it. And then it's growth hormone and insulin. That's it.
Yeah. And I think like you just said, a sprinkle of Nandrolone, right? I think for most guys, the days of running huge amounts of DECA are done. At least with my guys, it's not really a vector that I push too hard. I don't think it's needed, right? You can get with 200 milligrams of that on top of something else is generally enough to leverage. You don't really need the days of like the 600 milligrams of DECA, 800 milligrams of DECA, gram of DECA. I don't personally know anyone who's using that much of that particular. I know lots of guys using 2 grams of test or more.
Yeah, I've run a gram of DECA before. It's not fun.
No. When it becomes not fun, it's really not fun, and then it's not fun for a while.
Yeah, if you like your thing to work, it's not a good choice.
And if you like to not be paranoid.
Yeah,
right? Really
that's my issue. Is I get panic attacks.
Yeah.
That's why I opt. I know a lot of people are like, "Why do you opt for NPP? Why do you opt for NPP?" And you see a lot of pros. Fast in, fast out. So if I get in trouble, I can pull the plug.
Yep. The same way with Tren, right? You typically would use acetate. Fast in, fast out.
Yep. I don't want to be stuck if I'm having a problem.
Yeah, for weeks.
But I would say generally that's what you see in the off season. I do hear of guys every once in a while, still pros running Anadrol.
Some do. I mean, there was a pro. I don't know if you told me. Someone just told me recently of a guy running a gram of Ment. Oh, it was Steve.
Yeah.
Figure Steve said he knows a guy in the Middle East that was running a gram of Ment. I mean, it's not to say guys don't do stuff like that. I just don't find those compounds that useful. I don't know. It's just water. It seems like it's like injectable D-ball, basically.
Well, this is another lecture that I have for my clients too when I talk to them, is you have to have your 10-year roadmap in front of you if you're serious about bodybuilding. If you want to progress to the point where you've accumulated enough size to be competitive on a national stage or potentially get a pro card, if you blow yourself out of the water running harsh stuff, you're not going to last the 10 years required to accumulate that sort of mass. There's only so much muscle protein synthesis you can generate in a given period of time. End of story.
Yep.
There's a real life example of it. You can look at Nick Walker. Nick Walker probably probably put on the most amount of size of any human being on the planet. And he went, he put on about 100 pounds in a 10-year period of time, something like that.
Yeah.
10 pounds a year. Now, granted, that growth is not linear. I mean, he may have gained 20 his first year, 12 his second, 8, 5, 4. Generally, as you get bigger, the growth goes down.
Yeah, definitely. Lee Haney always tells the story that every year that he was on like Mr. Olympia, he gained 2 to 3 pounds a year. That was it.
Yeah.
Vaginal tissue. And I mean, and I'm no Nick Walker by any means, but I've done this pretty methodically over since my return to the gym. I was out of a gym for a decade and I came back at 39. So I regained mass that I had lost, but then I gained 17 pounds the first year back. And then it averaged about 10 pounds a year after that. And that's really all you can gain without fat. When I brought my weight way high, it was just junk. When I dieted down, it was no more mass than I would have gained without getting fat.
I had that pretty epic year where I put on 50 pounds of stage weight, but that was really sort of an illusion because I had been big before. Yeah, I had over dieted and lost a bunch of muscle, and it was really, I had come back from training. I had been big before when I was younger, so that's not realistic for most people.
I mean, it's still real, but it's same with mine. Like my initial 8 weeks back in the gym, I gained 20 pounds. It didn't mean that was all new 20 pounds. It was weight I regained mostly.
I mean, I was 300 pounds in my 20s, but it wasn't a pretty 300 pounds, but I was definitely big. Yeah. So, I mean, circling back, as far as dosing goes, that progresses as you get bigger. I usually tell people, once again, I'm not shy on doses, but I usually tell people use the minimum effective dose, find that, and then progress up. And I think you talked about it before. When you're smaller, and you're throwing a bunch of androgens at it, they're just not going to be used.
No. And you see that in side effects, right? And see, you get much worse side effects, right? Sleep, acne, hair loss, all those things will occur at a much faster rate once your body can only tolerate so many androgens. That's an individual thing based on genetics. And the other thing is for younger guys that they might not realize, if you come out of the gate running a gram a gear, where are you going from there? You can't go down. Right.
Yeah.
It's like I can no longer grow on 300 milligrams. So it wouldn't do anything. So you don't want to start that way because then you're going to be at 5 grams a gear in your second year. You'll be dead by year 4.
Yep.
Right. I mean, that's the
I mean, we've seen it before. There's, the examples, Dallas McCarver.
Yep. I mean, he got big, but he's not alive.
Yeah. That's another thing too. I had a recent video up where a guy said, well, there was guys taking this and taking that. And I'm like, every single person you listed off there died.
Yep. Well, like we talked about him before, that was you doing 750 tests in his lats.
Oh, Nasser.
I mean, he lived till he was 50, but he died.
Yeah.
Right. So you could say you could take 5 grams a test for a period of time until your body doesn't do that anymore.
I mean, from what I understand, Jay Cutler was more moderate with what he, bodybuilding moderate. So we say moderate in relativity. I mean, he was still running more than probably 95% of people were.
But for his size, it was moderate.
Right. And if you don't have enough tissue, I mean, I would assume if you don't have enough tissue, there's not enough androgen receptors to even put all that extra to work anyway.
Yeah. Well, and the more androgens you run, the more the androgen receptor will upregulate. So you'll have more active receptors. So over time, you're just going to have more, right? There's some guys, a Dorian Yates, a Ronnie Coleman, that were born with a higher density of receptors that most humans don't have, right? As we see other guys that don't respond well, don't have a ton of androgen receptors, probably have a lot of slow twitch muscle fibers, and they just can't really use, no matter what you give them, they're not going to really respond well.
They should take up running marathons.
There you go. Yeah. I mean, there's all these other sports.
I mean, that's probably what they're made for if they're mostly slow twitch.
Yep.
I think I'm predominantly a fast twitch guy.
I would think so. Yeah. But you tend to see it in also what are the things you're good at, right? I was a sprinter in college, and I came from a long line of people on both sides of my family that were strength athletes. So it tends to run in families, right? If you come from a family line where everyone's running 24 miles at a time, bodybuilding might not be the most ideal sport for you.
Yeah. my dad was always, muscular, and he never lifted a weight.
Yeah.
He always
Genetics, right?
had veins in his arms and abs when I was a kid, and he just worked a manual labor job, had big old forearms. Yeah. Just genetic. So there is a genetic play into it. But circling back for a mass cycle, just keep it simple. Keep it basic. Don't overthink it. Let the food do the work. A testosterone base. Build everything out with a testosterone base. You pick an anabolic that works for you. Generally, it's EQ, primobolan, or Masteron, something that's going to help modulate estrogen, right?
Yep.
And then if you can handle 19 Nors, sprinkle in a little bit of nandrolone, and then GH and insulin.
Yeah. I mean, and I think some of the 19 Nor stuff I feel like is also age dependent, right? I think when you're younger, you tolerate it a little better, and then you get to our age and it's really not as fun as it once was.
I've definitely noticed that as I've gotten older that the 19 Nors do not agree with me anymore.
No. Yeah. And nor do you really need it,
No. For me now, it's just test and primobolan is what I like to run.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think everything else starts to not feel great after a certain period of time. You do it long enough.
I feel fantastic on test and primobolan. I grow on test and primobolan. I don't get all the side effects on primobolan, test and primobolan. My blood work looks fairly decent on test and primobolan. Yeah. Another thing I really wanted to touch on quickly before we wrap this up is a lot of dudes, especially young guys, get hung up on confusing side effects. With
the positive effects.
With the positive effects. They think because that's the reputation that primobolan has is you don't feel anything. Well, it's not working. It doesn't mean that it's not working because you don't feel like shit.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think on a basic level, right? I mean, most steroids roughly hold about the same amount of nitrogen. There's some exceptions, right? And some is ester dependent. Yeah. Like nandrolone decanoate holds more nitrogen than nandrolone phenylpropionate, partly because it's in your system longer, right? And testosterone, longer esters hold more nitrogen than testosterone propionate. That's an unfortunate fact of physiology, but they're all about equal when it comes to that. That's more the anti-catabolic effects, right? But as far as like protein synthesis, they're all pretty similar. What people tend to judge, though, are the side effects, right? They're like, well, Anadrol is much stronger because I feel like garbage on it, right? And the scale went up and my blood pressure is up, so it must be working more. But in reality, it's not building necessarily any more tissue than Anavar would. It's just you're judging those horrible effects.
And the strength gains from these things also don't translate one-to-one to tissue accumulation. Yeah. So something like Anadrol is going to promote CNS stimulation, which is going to drive more strength. It doesn't mean that you're growing more from it.
No. I did a post on that the other day. I don't know if you read it about.
No, I didn't see
things like that. So like the Halotestin is a great example of that too, right? Your strength goes up within days dramatically. Yeah. It's what you're saying. So basically you become more sensitive to your own adrenaline, right? It upregulates beta receptors. And so your own circulating adrenaline now you become more responsive to it. And that's where most of the initial strength gain comes from. There's some later on that comes from red blood cells and some other effects, but water storage will increase strength to a degree, but that initial thing is just your nervous system is on all the time, which does not equate to tissue growth at all, right? Because you could take Halotestin and double your bench press in a few weeks. It doesn't mean your chest grew at all, right? And powerlifters is a great example of that. They don't necessarily put weight on. They don't want to put weight on.
Yeah, it was interesting last year at the end of my contest prep, Kurt, I ran Halotestin my last 2 weeks. And anybody who's done contest prep knows that you should be weaker lines. Yeah. Right. And I would say my weights were in reps were about 80% of what they were at the beginning of prep at 2 weeks out. And then I threw the Halotestin in and that was right back up to my pre.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, my squat has gone up by like 100 pounds before throwing that.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, out of the blue, and you're very amped up to lift that weight, right? Versus other stuff where your strength goes up from muscle mass. You don't necessarily feel the drive to lift weight, but Halotestin makes you actually want to move weight.
I would assume, though, that can't be good for adrenal fatigue.
No. It's just generally not good for you at all, I would say.
Yeah. So don't confuse that with adding tissue, folks.
Yeah.
It's not the same thing. If you're a power lifter, then it's a tool of the trade. If you're a bodybuilder, you probably don't need it.
Yeah. And two things with that as well. Like one of the most dangerous combinations, again, people do things in prep, but prep is a time to push that metric, not in the off season. Combining something like stimulant with something that's going to make you sensitive to your own adrenaline, like combining clenbuterol and halotestin, is not necessarily a great idea, because that can result in some devastating cardiovascular effects to combine the two of those, right? Because now you've magnified the effect.
Yep.
The other thing is it goes back to the food. So the example of where you take Halo and you get stronger, but it's not tissue, and powerlifters, one of the reasons why bodybuilders are bigger than powerlifters is because they eat for size, right? Where bodybuilders, powerlifters tend, unless they're in the big classes, they tend to keep their weight down. My father used to be a powerlifter, and he competed at a very light weight. He couldn't get any bigger because you couldn't be competitive at a higher weight. So you only cared about strength, right? Versus you and I care about size.
Right.
It's food that drives the size, not the drugs.
Different objectives.
They use the same drugs. Powerlifters and bodybuilders generally use about the same drugs, give or take, the same amount at least.
Yeah, I've actually found that powerlifters use less.
More. Less?
Yeah, from what
I've seen. And the European guys push the envelope with that stuff a lot.
Yeah, usually what I see is they'll run test nandrolone, and then they'll run anadrol peaking for a show, or peaking for a meet, or halotestin, or both.
Yeah, or Superdrol.
Superdrol. All right, Kurt, any parting words on this?
No, I just think if people should, it's keeping it simpler, right? Keeping it healthier, especially in the off season. There's no need to make yourself ill and not sleep and feel like shit. You're not going to grow anymore by doing that. You're probably going to get less out of it, right? Leverage the food harder in a healthy way. It's pretty basic.
Just be smart about it.
Yeah.
Yep. It's really simple. It's really bodybuilding, and progressing in bodybuilding and growing is a game of consistency over a long period of time. It's really boring and monotonous, and you have to be okay with doing boring and monotonous stuff. Just wash, rinse, repeat. That's really it.
For a decade, at least.
For a decade. All right, folks. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to Kurt's channel.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Take care.